And that would be wonderful. I think that would solve a lot of the problems that we have apparently in this county.
Great idea.
Okay, let's see. So I voted by absentee, didn't have any problems. I did receive, I believe it was before the last election, I received a new voter registration card that showed the district, my district did change. I think that was the last election, I'm not sure, maybe 2 elections ago. So it was, not immediately clear, but it changed and I ended up in the right place, so that was fortunate. I guess I do, when you talk about process, this process or any process, I think my concern is about the process that occurred before the election. I won't belabor the point, I know this is not the forum to discuss that. I believe, again, that I have some constructive ideas, and not just ideas, things that could be done that are not going to cost the taxpayers $63.5 million.
Thank you, Ms. Ball. Appreciate it. David Winters, followed by Helen Boyd Green. David Winters. Hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Winters, and I live at 826 North M Street. I voted early that morning at the First Congregational Church. I was not registered. My barcode did not register, so I filled out a provisional ballot. I thought that would be a great process. Technology does have its quirks. I know the benefits because I am in that industry, and there is a benefit. However, since it was such a close election, I monitored the website looking for the provisional ballot. I'm sorry, prior to that day, on that day, they did call me to come back. But the website, day after day, did not report that my provisional ballot was counted. It was a very quick link, my first name, last name, nothing. So I called 1 day, I called 2 days, I called 3 days. Consistently, the message was, we don't know, and the last thing on that Friday, at the end of that week, they said, a worker said, there's going to be letters sent out to those people that had issues with provisional ballots. So then I called back again today. And, I've registered as a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, and I may not have the long voting record that some of the people in this room may have had, but I do think that voting is not only a privilege, but it's very valuable, probably more valuable than the $63 million bond that we were voting on. So today, I was rather hot and expressed my concern to the county worker and said, listen, why was my provisional ballot not counted? Well, the reason is that wasn't anything that I did. I was there. The only thing I left from that office after I voted at the First Congregational Church was a sticker that said, I voted and my vote counts. However, my vote did not count due to an error by a staff worker there at the location. So, my vote didn't count. So, let me read my notes. So, I did receive a call from Susan Butcher today. She explained to me that the real issue is not in the technology, and I coined this as hanging technology chads, right? However, the benefits of going through technology is beneficial. We all would have blue ink on our fingers if we had voted many years ago. Biometrics is actually pretty good. So if we scanned everyone's finger and voted that way, we would all get an equal vote. However, she explained to me the laws, and one of the laws that I disagree that disenfranchises ballots is the process in which these ballots are thrown out. If the poll worker, not the voter, makes the mistake, the only thing I get is a sticker. So, let's see, however, I know that the scanning of my driver's license, which is about 3 months old, had the proper identification, had the barcode to scan, but was not scannable. Not that I'm discounting technology, because the thing with technology is that you get better, accurate results, faster reporting, and the technology, instead of sending a poll worker out there, a person can remote in, see what the issue is, without the time it takes to get there. So, I'm not an anti-technology person, but I have to tell you the experience I had during this voting process.
I probably witnessed your provisional ballot right there, exactly the same thing. Poll worker incidents, and I questioned the supervisor of elections too, to say, is that a policy, is that a law? Consult my attorney. Glenn?
The statute reads exactly the opposite of what you did. It says, a ballot of a person casting a provisional ballot shall be counted unless the canvassing board determines by preponderance of the evidence that the person was not entitled to vote. You certainly were entitled to vote. The only evidence was the clerk made an error. So that's where the supervisor's interpretation of the law, I mean, that language is pretty clear, and not a lot of legalese there, shall be counted unless the person's not entitled to vote. And that is the one that gives me heartburn, that how can the supervisor election just blatantly ignore what the law says, and now your vote didn't count.
Another one. Vice Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Winters, I can't tell you how I feel about your vote not count. I would be absolutely bat crazy if my vote didn't count.
You know, if you see the opposing sides and how emotional they can become, you know, can you imagine these people that get really emotional if their vote doesn't count?
Well, yeah, and I thank you for being very calm, because I couldn't have stood up here like you did and kept my composure maybe. But here's, one of the first things you said was that they called me back, or they called you to come back.
They did call me to come back, but I had my daughter, we were preparing for dinner, you know, a lot of things were happening. My life was continuing.
Sure, well, obviously. Now, when you say they, am I to assume that was somebody from the supervisor's office?
Actually, someone from the polling place. They said they would be there, I could come, recast my vote, and I said, well, I did the provisional ballot, I voted, you know? It was the same form.
Wow. Thank you very much. Glenn, I want to make a comment about that, because I know somebody else said that they heard it on the street, and Mr. Winters is suggesting that maybe an actual county employee or somebody employed by the county took the time, had the initiative, wherewithal to call him. It begs the question, is that a policy that the supervisor had? Was this a decision that was made on the fly during the course of the election? And more importantly, regardless of how it came about, how could we be absolutely sure that everybody that was in your situation got a phone call and an opportunity to come back? And number two, if they did get a phone call and for whatever reason, like you said, your life goes on, they couldn't come back.
Where Miss Lowe's family wasn't contacted and told that she could come back. So there obviously wasn't an across-the-board policy that everybody was going to be contacted, it seems like.
And the real culprit, I'm sorry to add just one more thing, is the laws regarding the ballot process, the provisional ballot process, more so than the technology.
We won't dog your technology.
Thank you.
Commissioner McWilliams?
No,
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to ask about, since you had a provisional, were you given any written instructions by the staff there before you left about the process, how to access the website or anything?
If it wasn't encompassed on the sticker,
The answer's no. It was on the back of the sticker, you didn't read it finally. It's a nice sticker.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. Helen Green, followed by Dale Hewlin.
My name is Helen Vogt Green. I live at 215 North M Street. I don't know if that's necessary to say, because I've noticed that everyone has not been giving their address. But I'm the infamous person who wrote the article, for which I'm sure that Mark Eastman would probably just as appreciated me not writing at that particular time, but I appreciated publishing it anyway. It was an interesting experience for me. I usually vote early. I arrived at the polling station, which is at the Congregational Church, at about 7:15 in the morning. And they always manage to change the doors, you know. And we used to vote at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, and it used to be sort of like a family reunion. Everybody knew everybody, but now everything is very computerized, which is fine. I mean, we're in a new tech world, and we're expecting it. And it was a new process, and so I put my license there, and I had my little card there with me. And her comment to me was, "You're not eligible to vote, Mrs. Green." And I said, hello? Very calmly. I was very, you would have been proud of me. And so I said, I do think you better let's check it again. So they rechecked it, and sure enough, I was ineligible to vote, and so she said, you need to go over and talk to the clerk. And by that time, there were 4 of us that were in the same situation. One came from the other precinct, 3 others came, and so one of them was standing at the table when we arrived, and we went through. The process is pretty much the same as Mr. Mahoney indicated. It was, they weren't prepared for this to happen, first of all. And so we were already into a 30-minute, almost 40-minute discussion as to what we were going to do. And we had one lady who was going to work, and she was weary. She was either had come from work or going to work, and she was tired. And so I just started rearranging chairs, and so that people could sit down. And I took one put by the clerk. Now I must admit that the young lady who was there, although she was lovely, very nice, but I don't think she knew too much about what was going on. And she found it rather hesitant, and so I indicated to her that I thought it would be really interesting if she would call the Supervisor of Elections office and to determine what we were going to do, because the provisional ballots had not been mentioned at that particular time. And so there was a great deal of conversation. In fact, the poor young lady was cut off, and she had to redial and restart all over again. And when we got finally through, she gave me a provisional ballot. I completed the provisional ballot and handed it to one of the poll workers, the one that had sent me to the clerk. She was going to accept it as such, and since I worked in the polls before, I asked her, don't you think that you better sign it? She would not have signed the provisional ballot had I not suggested it to her. She placed it over with some other papers, as Mr. Mahoney said. There was no box that it was put in. It was put off to the side with some other papers. And someone said, is your husband going to come in? And I said, yeah, but's gonna come. And so I hurried home, and I got home probably around 10:30, thereabouts, about 10:15, and I was telling Bud about what was happening, and he hurried our neighbor along who was going to be voting with him, and both of them had difficulty. But by the time they finished, Bud had just started going through the provisional ballot, and I had warned him to make sure that the lady who would sign his ballot, he had a great deal of difficulty reading the provisional ballot. It's very, very small print. If you were to, anybody who has any problem. Now, I found out later that they do have magnifying glasses that you can use, but no one offered any. But by the time he started it, there was indication that everything had been corrected. He did not vote a provisional ballot. And as he came home, he indicated to me that if I returned, I could vote. Or I said, well, I've already voted, but he said, well, you know how things get lost. And I said, yes, no. So I returned, and they removed my provisional ballot from wherever the provisional ballots were. And by that time, they had sent in what was referred to as the super clerk. She knew what was happening. She was really very, very well. She took my provisional ballot, which, by the way, is folded and she was concerned whether or not it would be counted. So she went with me as I put it in the machine, because she said, if it does not count, then I will have to you will have to re-vote, and I will give you a new ballot. I returned home, and the article that you see was about approximately a half hour after I got home. It was really an interesting experience. The one thing that you'll notice at the end, it was generated by the lady who could not remain to vote because she needed to go to work. She was a lovely lady, and I wish that she were here tonight. She was very, very frustrated. And she said to me, as she was leaving, she said, I really need to go to work, but this is Lake Worth. And I told her right then, I said, this is not Lake Worth's fault. This is really not Lake Worth's fault. And the other gentleman who was there, and I do not know any of their names, I wish that I did, because I would have really liked to have called them that, especially the lady, because she was really very angry at the vote. That's my story.
Thank you.
I'll stick to it.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Ms. Green, I listened to your story, I got the impression that you personally there for a long period of time. This process for you was a
I have lived here, I am a pioneer family. I'm not that old, but because to be a pioneer, you have to be back here by May 18th, 1914, and I don't go back that far, but my husband's family.
No, I understand, no, and that's, I'm sorry. What I meant was, when you actually voted, the time that it took you to vote, that process was
Oh, it was about at least an hour.
an hour. And were there people behind you waiting?
Absolutely, and there were people who were coming in who were having the same problem. Now, by the time about 10:30, 10:45, when Bud was there, they did not have those problems.
And let me ask Glenn a question. We talked a little bit about the box. I know I've seen in years past, so I think we kind of talked about that, but is there a protocol or some sort of chain of custody? Is there some sort of accounting of each precinct gets X amount of provisional ballots to start the day? Are they numbered? Is there any way that we know that we went in with 100 and we came out with 80 and 20 were filled out and everything balances? Or is this one of those things? My concern is when you say things like, you were told, well, you know how things get lost.
Well, that was my husband who
If
was
there's
saying
no,
that.
if there's no chain, if there's no chain of custody, if there's no chain of custody and we don't have any way of verifying, you know.
Well, I think that any person who has the opportunity to correct a difference between going and voting or doing a provisional ballot, I think things do get lost, not intentionally, but there's a lot of people voting, we hope more people will vote in the next election. But I think that it's important that you go back, if you have the opportunity to make that correction. It's not always possible.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wilson?
Glenn, let's talk about the box again. Was it clear that, the boxes are supposed to be locked?
Well, it's not clear because we haven't had that conversation with Supervisor Election as to what her policy is. Certainly, that would be logical, best practices. And for Ms. Green particularly, I'm really confused because she voted provisionally, then you went back and you voted, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, there's a list of people here who voted provisionally and came back and voted, and your name is not on that list. So I don't know whether your vote counted or not, whether because that super clerk put it through for you, Maybe they took it off the provisional list, which makes no sense if she filled out a provisional ballot. This is supposed to be the list of every single provisional ballot, and your name's not on the list.
Well,
So,
and that's what I was trying to get at. If there's a protocol for the box, is it supposed to be locked? Obviously, you know, they have gone back in and removed it, and we're hearing that, you know, some locations didn't even have a box.
right.
And then, Mr. Mahoney, made a comment, you know, he's obviously on the list, but he went back in and voted regularly, but his wasn't taken off the list. Why was hers taken off the list and his wasn't?
Well, and the manager just showed me on his iPad, which works better than the clerk's iPad.
It's a Lenovo, it's
Oh,
not.
excuse me. That once voted, this is the law, once voted, the provisional ballot shall be placed in a secrecy envelope and thereafter sealed in a provisional ballot envelope. That seemed to happen. The provisional ballot shall then be deposited in a ballot box. So,
And no one gave me any information.
Did you see your provisional ballot?
No, the
After.
only thing, oh,
When the super clerk arrived?
when super clerk,
Super.
that's what that is what the supervisor election called her. And when she called the house and to apologize, specifically to Bud, she was apologizing to Bud, and he was nice. Anyway, he was telling me, he said, well, my wife was the one who alerted me to the possibility. And so, to answer your question, I don't know how they work the box. I know that when I was on the polls, we had a special box that we put provisional ballots in. And they were handled by the clerk, it was not handled by the poll worker. I dealt with a poll worker, and if someone were to ask me if it was sealed, I do not know, but it was opened by the super clerk and handed to me, and we walked together over to vote.
Okay, thank you.
And I know that people did not have the opportunity to vote.
how many people do you think do not have?
I could easily say 5, that one lady, that were frustrated about the voting process. Now, whether or not they got provisional vote ballots after I left, they would have to have been very patient people to fill out a provisional ballot.
I'm gonna ask if we take a quick break. We have a function booked for the city that we need to make a couple of phone calls.
I did.
You did? I've gotta make one myself personally, so then I'll turn this over to Vice Mayor to do the honors. Here.
Do I have a phone call maybe?
No, I'll make the phone call for you.
Okay. Next up, Mr. Dale Hewlin, please.
Dale Hewlin, 509 Sunrise Court. I'm just thinking, working. There? Okay. 509 Sunrise Court. I voted the church on A and Lake, and they told me that they couldn't find me in the system. The man that's been doing our area for the last 10 to 12 years, we were in a small group at one time, now we're in a bigger precinct or something. He filled everything out for me. I didn't do anything. He filled everything out, handed me the ballot, I filled out the ballot, I signed it, he gave it to me, I put it in an envelope, sealed it, put it in their lockbox, supposed lockbox. It was a storage box with the 2 folded lids on it, and it had a slot in it. I didn't see the slot, so I picked up the end of the box and was gonna slide it in. At the other end was a wrap tie, plastic tie wrap. That was the only thing holding it closed. And then he finally told me there was a slot, and I dropped it in. And this was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and it stuck out of the top of the box that far, so that's how many ballots were already in it. I had to kick it a couple of times to get it to even lay down. So I don't know if my vote counted or not. I never heard anything from anybody.
Did you vote provisionally? Or
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, I voted, filled out the form, they couldn't
How
find
do
me in
you
the system.
How do you spell your last name?
Hulen.
He's on the last page again, And my question would be, there's nothing to the right of, what does that mean? Did it get counted?
Yes, your vote did get counted.
Oh, good. So I didn't do anything. He filled everything out. I just.
He didn't fill out your ballot for you though.
No, no. I didn't want it filled out. He was there for a long time filling out everything that had to be filled out.
Yes, yours was one of the 5 that were counted out
Oh,
of
good.
the 30 provisional.
Thank you.
One moment, Mr. Yurley. Any other questions from colleagues?
No.
I have a question. Mr. Yurley, I know you for a lot of different issues over the years, and as I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there were only about 2 handful of voters in your precinct, is that?
Yes, sir.
Because I know each year when we have elections, I look and I say, why does this precinct only have 2 votes? Or why does this precinct only have 1 vote? And I think in this year, I think it was 1 vote.
Yeah, my wife was on the list, but I wasn't.
And I guess my point is, your assertion was they couldn't find you
Yeah.
when there's only this many to start with. How in the world?
They tried everything, like license, driver's license, they did everything they could.
Sure.
2 different people tried it, 2 different machines, different precincts. They typed it in and still couldn't find me. And that's when the man that's been been sitting there behind that little bitty table all these years, filled out a little paperwork for me and said, here, over the thing, fill it out. I brought it back, like I say, I sealed it, I put everything together and dropped it in this plastic box.
Well, good, I'm glad that you told them to vote counted, now you know. Commissioner Ambrose?
What precinct is that? Where is that voting for?
8th Street and Lake.
The church on the corners, Lake.
But the precinct
Lake
itself,
and I
geographically.
think it's right now, it's like precinct 609 is where I was supposed to vote. I don't know where that came from.
I think the precinct itself geographically is like by the power plant.
Yeah.
And it's only a couple of streets, it's not a
Yeah,
very large
no, it's not. It's
geographic
not
area.
a dozen people
Okay.
on the whole precinct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Yurley.
Thank you.
Commissioner Golden?
Thank you, Vice Mayor and Commissioners and everybody else here. I think this meeting is a good thing to have, that people know that there's a lot of issues over elections. And that, I think Commissioner McCoy was right, that we should get the other county offices together and see how this could happen. It seems a little lax in the voting process. I have a little problem with this process because there's so many anecdotal things going on here that it's difficult. It's not really fair to the public to just have anecdotes about what happened, and people's names aren't really given, and we don't know how many people, did I really call? I called you at 6 o'clock at night, I voted at 10 in the morning. It's all very confusing to me, so I find that there's a lot of issues involved. There's also issues with people's responsibility to know where they vote. I mean, a lot of times people get the card, they forget where they vote, they don't know where they vote. That's people's responsibility. That's our individual's responsibility to know where you vote, and that shouldn't be a problem. That shouldn't be changed. You know, one of the problems I had was when you were asking about the provisional ballot.